Hi, everyone. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to log into the session and then we'll get started. Okay, hi everyone, welcome again to our webinar. I just wanted to remind everyone that this is a pre-recorded session. Everyone will receive an email following the session with a link to the recording. And please make sure to put any questions in the Q&A section and not the chat. We will follow up and answer any questions you have within the next 24 hours. Okay, thanks for joining and we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, where our topic will be best practices when considering employee housing, presented by our partner, DCG Strategies. My name is James Collins. I'm the Senior Director of Business Development here at CSBA, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. This is a pre-recorded webinar, but we will still be taking any questions you may have. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar, and we will get back to you within 48 hours. And at this time, I would like to introduce our presenters for today's discussion. Landis Graydon, CEO, DCG Strategies, and Lauren Jennings, VP of Operations, DCG Strategies. At this time, I will turn it over to Lauren. Lauren?
Well, thank you, James, so much for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and thank you for tuning in. As James stated, today's webinar topic is titled Best Practices when Considering Employee Housing. And so as I'm sure you all know, employee housing is a very, very, very hot topic throughout the state of California. And so today's webinar is for those districts who are potentially considering employee housing and also who just want to learn more about where to start. And so as James stated, my name is Lauren Jennings. I am with DCG Strategies. Our company, DCG Strategies, we were founded in 2005. And really for the past 17 years, we've been working with public school districts and public schools throughout California, helping them with their real estate needs. And so we always say that we're a full service real estate company, meaning that we provide brokerage and disposition services for school districts. We also do real estate consulting and then development consulting as well too. And so DCG, we are proud to be a CSBA partner and service provider. And together with CSBA, we provide property planning solutions, which is an exclusive service for CSBA members and local educational agencies throughout the state. Also, as James mentioned, I will be joined in today's presentation by Landis Graydon, who is our president and CEO, and you will hear from him a little bit later in today's presentation. And so in working with school districts, our team really was one of the first companies to pioneer with helping districts explore the feasibility of providing housing for their employees. We've been specifically providing the service of feasibility of employee housing since 2015. And obviously over the past most recent years, we've seen a large increase in influx and interest from school districts, and particularly districts where areas of high housing costs are high. And so our experience with public schools and districts, coupled with our real estate and development experience, we've really been able to identify what we believe to be the best practices when exploring employee housing. So again, today's webinar will touch on these best practices. So for our agenda today, we've broken our webinar out into 3 sections: policy, process, and property. So I will start us off. I'll share more about policy. And when we say policy, we're going to talk about helping to build the case, so to speak, for employee housing. Over the years, there have been a lot of different studies by a lot of different agencies, a ton of different research on employee housing. So I'll share some of the key findings that the research has shown. And really the intent behind this is to help you as board members create policy in support of your district providing housing for your employees. We'll then go through the next steps, and the second section, which I'll hand over to Landis for, will be the process for exploring the feasibility of housing. So if you want to explore feasibility, what's the process and what do we recommend as those best practices? And then last but not least, we'll discuss the actual real estate strategy behind it. Okay, so let's get started. Again, one of the critical reasons why districts are exploring housing for their employees is really due to, no surprise, the teacher shortage and the housing crisis. And so specifically for us in California, again, this is no surprise to you as board members, but this has really created the not so perfect storm for school districts. And so one way that districts have been helping, a strategy that they've created to help recruit and retain quality teachers, is by providing housing. And so before I go further, I definitely want to emphasize the fact that housing is not the only strategy. Housing is most definitely not the only strategy to help recruit and retain teachers. However, it can serve as a key tool for those districts that have the market demand and financial feasibility to be able to do so. So again, we'll just talk about what some of those best practices are. So let's first start off with the teacher shortage. Again, it's no secret that everyone everywhere has been experiencing a teacher shortage. So there is a fact here from a 2018 study from the Learning Institute, and the numbers have definitely gotten worse since 2018, and they have not gotten better. So of note, there was also another study in 2019 that found that there was a higher teacher shortage in areas with higher housing costs. And then last but not least, another study as depicted on the slide here from Mills College in 2021, so as recent as last year, studied really what the major contributing factors to teacher shortage was, and a few of them are listed here on this slide. Economic stress is one of those key factors, and I'd love to drill down just a little bit more on economic stress. And so furthermore, the American Educational Research Foundation found that teachers with high economic stress have lower school attendance and are more likely to leave the district. So when we talk about retention strategies, helping to reduce the economic stress of employees can be very critical and a very vital part of our strategies. And so now moving away from the teacher shortage and moving now to the California housing crisis. So this coupled with the two of them have really had crippling effects on teachers. Again, no surprise here. Really the intent of this is just to provide data and snapshots of that data. So for California, this statistic here is from 2021, and it states that the median home price in California is over $800,000. Since 2021, I would say home prices have increased about 5%. So home prices are now currently on average between $830,000 and $840,000 for a median home price in California. Another alarming statistic is that more than 25% of households spend more than half of their gross income on housing. And this is specifically for rental households. And so I wanted to really point this statistic out because financial advisors state that residents and renters should spend no more than 30% of their gross household income on housing. And so 30 to 50% of household income spent on housing, again, gross household income spent on housing, is considered cost burdened. And anything more than 50% of gross household income is considered plain unaffordable. And so the fact that we have more than 25% of renters in California spending more than 50% of their household income on housing really speaks to the true housing crisis and just the unaffordability of housing throughout the state of California. And so last but not least, there was another survey completed. This is from 2019, and it was a survey across districts in California. And the survey received responses from 680 districts. And the survey, again, was specifically focused on housing affordability for teachers. And so we pulled out some of those key statistics here as well, too. So I'm not going to go through them in detail, but also wanted to make note that there's a QR code in the top right corner of your slide. And so the full survey and findings from this study can be found if you were to direct your phone or device to the QR code in the corner. And so next I'll hand it over to Landis and he'll go through the next step, which is process.
Thanks, Lauren. And it was really good to really help districts and board members understand the importance of looking at the policy imperatives, because sometimes there's so many different things happening in school districts. You're focused on academic outcomes, you're focused on safety, and looking at things like economic stress and medium home prices in the areas isn't something that's usually at the top of the agenda, but we're seeing districts pay attention to it more and more as they're seeing employees rotate out of districts sooner than expected, having a hard time recruiting teachers. So we just think it's great to start with data points wherever you are so that you can start exploring, is teacher housing, employee housing, something that we really need to be paying attention to as a district. So what we want to talk about now is, if you decide that our district has some of these variables that are indicating that we should at least explore employee housing as a retention and recruitment tool, then we're going to now talk about what are some of the best practices in beginning that exploration. So when we talk about process, we're talking about, you're not at the point where you've made policy decisions, but you're now thinking, should we? So what are some of the things that you should think about as you start this process? Well, we're out a lot. We're working with a number of districts throughout the state. And one thing that we always recommend as a first step is making sure that the board has alignment. So you may have staff really wanting to look at this. You may have a board member or two thinking this is a priority, but it's important to have the entire board at least weigh in on where you are as a district with looking at this as an appropriate next step for the district to go into exploration. If the board isn't aligned, if there are just other priorities or now isn't the time, we do not recommend you proceed forward. But if the board at least wants to learn more, then that should be enough to start. The first thing you could do after the board decides we at least want to learn more, we're not sure yet, is take a look at sites that you currently hold in the district that could be either surplus or underutilized or both. Sometimes the surplus site is still in service, but it's a site that the district has said we may not need in the future. And then you have underutilized property, which may not be surplus. It could just be there's a charter school, a program there, and it's taking up, let's just say 25% of the capacity. And upon further exploration, that is a program that can be moved to another site. And voila, one of your underutilized sites is a good candidate. So we're saying explore your sites, look for surplus sites, and look for sites that are not fully utilized. Because what we've also learned is when districts take a step back and say, you know what, as a matter of fact, we can create an opportunity because we do have 3 sites. All of them are at 25% capacity. If we consolidate some programming, we can free up the site. So we advise, take a portfolio look, and then decide if you have sites that are available to be studied. The next thing you could do then, once you've decided, yes, as a board, we want to learn more, we do believe we have a site available, is measure demand. that is where you're going to issue a survey to your employees to just gauge, is there interest? Is there a need? And you'll also learn a little bit about just their economic situations, if they're renting, if they're buying, if they're in situations where housing is putting so much pressure on them that they're considering leaving the district. So we think a teacher survey, or an employee survey, excuse me, is a good tool to measure demand, and that would be an appropriate next step. From there, if you've already, the board is in alignment with learning more, you've decided we do have a site or two we can free up. The feedback from the survey says this probably would be a good idea for our district. We then believe you're at a position where you should go out and do the last step, is survey, talk to stakeholders, get some feedback from maybe your employee groups, union groups, maybe some political stakeholders, just to get a general sense of if this would be something that's played out, is information that tells the board, yes, actually, we have a really good idea that this would be a good policy for our district. Is what are the options to develop housing? And there are really three leading options to develop employee housing. One would be district financed, one would be publicly financed, and one would be financed through a developer partner. So we're going to walk through those. So the most popular aspect, which is the most popular option, which is what we recommend, is the district exploring developing housing on its own. That could be passing a GO bond, certificates of participation, partnering with other districts in the area from a funding perspective, or selling a site. And we've seen districts sell sites to fund housing, or in the process of selling sites, or passing bonds to fund housing. So that first option, option A, which is the district is driving its own project, is you have total control over the project. You control 100% of the units, and there is a really nice financial benefit, because those rents are passive income that contribute to the general fund over the long term. Some of the districts that we've studied, albeit these are high income areas, high housing areas, one district I'm thinking about that we've worked with in the peninsula, in the San Francisco area, their projected rental aggregate number over 30 years is $100 million in general fund dollars that would be contributed just through employee rents over 30 years. So it really does become a great resource for the district, in addition to the benefit of housing employees. So Santa Clara Unified School District is a district that has been able to successfully pass bonds or certificates of participation and then bonds. Soledad Unified has recently passed a bond, and they're in the process of developing their site. Jefferson Union High School District has actually just opened the doors to their first project. They were successful in passing a bond. They built the project out, and now employees are living. So those are examples of districts who decided we're going to fund it ourselves. We will have total control, but we will also see the upside. The next option is partnering with a developer. Now, we believe that this is an inferior option, but it is an option for districts. Maybe there is no land available, or the financial resources aren't available, or even the political will for a bond is just not an option. There are often developers, in especially high housing market communities, building projects. Oftentimes, those developers will be willing to set aside a certain percentage of units at a discount for employee housing. So we do believe that that is a viable option if the district can't sell a site or fund the site themselves. The pros of this is the district is taking no risk whatsoever. So there's no financial risk of investing in the project. They don't have to be managing a construction project. And also, you just are able to just make an option available for your employees and just focus on your academic outcomes and other priorities of the district. When it comes to the cons, there isn't too much of a financial upside. So that's not always a priority. Sometimes districts just want to truly provide housing. And so while that is a pro, we do recognize that there is the financial upside for districts when they go this route. And being able to have that passive income is a reason why we always try to encourage districts to do option A if possible, but option B certainly is an option. The last option is what LA Unified was able to successfully do, which is public financing. Now, public financing does come with policy limitations. The reason that being is usually one of the main aspects of a public finance project are tax credits, which is a state program. And because of that, there will be income restrictions. So employees earning less than 80% of the area median income will income qualify. What we find is some of the higher salaried employees, tenured teachers, and others are over income qualified. So while public finance is an option, you want to pay attention to income limitations and decide, are we going to be able to house the target employees if we go this option? But it is an option available. In this case, you most likely will need to partner with an affordable housing developer or a market developer who has extensive experience with tax credits, because that is a requirement. So as we look at those options, publicly financed, partnering with a developer, or going it on your own, those are the three leading financing options and development vehicles to establish employee housing. So when we talk about real estate strategy, what we're talking about is, now, what are the practical realities of determining how do we make sure that we're going to have a successful project? And so one thing that we recommend up front is conducting feasibility. A feasibility analysis allows the district to measure, are we going to be successful? Or put another way, does the project have a really good chance of being successful now that we're moving down this pathway? Now, why is this important for a district to do, especially because you're an education institution and you're not a real estate developer? Is because as you spend public resources, as you make more prerogatives, you want to ensure that you're successful, especially if you're using your own sites. So this feasibility analysis is really for those districts that have chosen option A. Either you're going to sell a site and develop your own housing, you're going to pass a bond of some sort, or you're going to do a certificate of participation and you're going to fund the project yourself. You're going to use district land to do so. So things that you want to know before you get too far down the road is, does the site that we think we want to develop housing, is it supportable for development? Because even though it's available doesn't mean that the site is suitable. So this is a deeper level of analysis above and beyond what we talked about early, where you're engaging interest, you're making sure the board is aligned. This is now pre-real estate development due diligence. This is definitely something you should outsource. And you're looking at how many units can we fit on the site? What type of units are we going to be able to fit? Would there be any traffic impacts? Could the dirt itself, are there geotechnical issues or soil issues? What is the entitlement process? The entitlement process is the process in which you apply to the local jurisdiction for permission to build a certain project. And of course, you're looking at project costs and financing options. So the feasibility study really, at the end of the day, tells you if there's a there. If there's a there, then you can proceed to the next step. If there is not a there, then chances are the sites that you've designated for development aren't very feasible, and you may need to regroup and look at other options. And so once you've completed feasibility, though, you're really building substantial momentum, assuming that feasibility is positive. What we've put together is a sketch. Now, this is a high-level outline. This is not saying it will be 32 to 36 months exactly. It's just to give you an order of magnitude about how long these projects could take, as well as just what are the various steps. This is an education for you to understand that once you make a policy decision to develop housing, it's not going to happen overnight. There are so many different moving pieces and variables that go into developing housing. So you do have time. After your feasibility study, which could take 2 to 4 months, this is after you've already established that you're going to go down this path, you're going to move into an entitlement process. So after you've studied and decided, yes, this site is suitable for development, and yes, we can actually pay for it, and now we will actually want to move down that process, then the board will apply, the district will apply to that local jurisdiction, whether it be a city or county, for approval to actually build the units. And that's the entitlement process, where there's a formal application submitted to the local jurisdiction. There will be a series of public meetings and hearings. There will be community outreach and engagement. There will be a lot of negotiations with the local jurisdictions. And ultimately, the city council, the board of supervisors, or whatever the policy-making body will vote to support the project from a construction perspective. That's the entitlement process. We like to say 12 to 18 months is the time frame. Once you get through that, which is mostly a planning process, then there's the building permit process. That's where it gets really technical inside of the building department. They're looking at very specific things, engineering, mechanical, HVAC units, very specific building items that require building permits. As an agency, you know all about it because you do capital projects all the time. So this is no different. So the permitting process, we just earmark 6 to 12 months. Then you move into construction. That could take 12 to 24 months. And then you go into doors open. So this is just really because a lot of districts just don't have real estate development experience outside facility development. We just want to give you an order of magnitude of what that process and timeline looks like. It could be 3 years, it could be 4 years. And one of the things that we also just wanted to include as we're wrapping up is just some of the key areas to consider while you're exploring workforce housing. Lauren mentioned earlier, as a recruitment and retention strategy, workforce housing is not the only tool. It's one tool. Now, it is a very popular tool. It's a tool that many board members are very curious about learning more. And we're also just saying there are other resources, first-time homebuyer programs and down payment assistance programs, and there are other tools. So we say consider a multi-pronged approach when you're looking at recruitment and retention strategies, and workforce housing could be a very good component of a multi-pronged approach of how do we recruit and retain teachers when it comes to relieving housing costs. Feasibility developing workforce housing on district-owned property, we talked about. That is a key. It's often the fastest path if you do have a site that is suitable for development and you believe that there is a reasonable expectation that we can fund it. We think going down a feasibility path on a site is very important. Getting clarity on legal and tax implications, especially the Surplus Lands Act and possessory tax laws. You'll have time, as we talked about, the timeline could be 12 to 36 months before you even open your doors, but just exploring what those implications could be, including asset management. Districts often say, we don't want to be in the property management business. We don't want to deal with just landlord-tenant relationships with our employees, and we agree with that. So one of the things that isn't on this slide I just want to insert is the importance of having an asset management strategy, meaning after we build it, who maintains it, who makes the decisions for evictions, how long can employees stay, et cetera, et cetera. So that is another consideration that we want to implement while we're going through this initial development cycle. Active communication, consistent communication, over communication, just being very clear with your employees, with your other stakeholders, with the city government, we think is a best practice, and that's a key to success. And then post-development considerations, I kind of touched on it when we were talking about clarity of legal and tax implications, but what that really means is how do we establish policy for taking care of these units when they're built? And lastly, we want to include just some case studies. We know board members love precedent. So what we did was we put together just an example of districts that have been successful with employee housing. So San Mateo Community College District, they were one of the first to take this path. And originally, they issued certificates of participation, which are debt instruments, to build first 44 units and then 60 units. They opened in 2005 and then in 2011. Very, very successful program. They still have a waiting list, and it's been touted as a big success for employee housing. A list of districts that we work with are here. Feel free to reach out to some of them. Berkeley Unified is actually, they passed a housing bond. Eastside explored feasibility. Jefferson Union has some doors open. So these are districts that we've worked with either on development feasibility or initial consulting work as it comes to workforce housing. So there are a lot of districts interested. Reach out to those that have been successful, but please reach out to CSBA to learn more. And thank you so much for taking time to listen to us.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Lauren and Landis, for presenting to our members on such an important topic. CSBA is dedicated to providing up-to-date resources to our school board members. To view our recent webinars, be sure to check out our YouTube page at youtube.com/CSBA video. If you're interested in attending future CSBA webinars, please go to our website at www.csba.org/webinars to register for upcoming webinars. Many thanks again to our presenters. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again for attending our webinar. Make sure to ask any questions in the Q&A before you log off, and we will follow up with a link to this recording soon. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.